Hello, and welcome to the Still to Be Determined podcast, the podcast that follows up on topics from the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell. I'm Sean Farrell. I'm a writer, and I'm the guy with the coffee maker behind him. I'm also Matt Farrell's brother, and this long pause is when Matthew will introduce himself.
I'm Matt Farrell. I'm obviously the guy that you see on the YouTube channel Undecided, where I talk about smart and sustainable technologies.
This week, we're going to be talking about the newest episode, which is titled New Tesla Battery, Exploring the China Prismatic LFP News. And this episode dropped on March 3rd, 2020. So before we get into that episode, I thought it would be a good time for us to launch into a diatribe against daylight savings. Last night,
causing a problem for you there, Sean?
Yeah, last night I went to bed.
Uh-huh.
This is going to be a lot of dominoes lined up to explain why my brain is currently mush. We were eating some delicious cheese, and it didn't occur to me until I was going to bed that the cheese had espresso, ground espresso.
Oh, God.
Which is delicious, but I was effectively chewing on espresso.
Yes.
For about an hour.
Uh-huh.
And so when I went to bed, I had a little bit of trouble falling asleep. And then in the middle of the night, I began to have an asthma attack.
That's great.
And so I then had to hunt down the Benadryl that we have, which happened to be in my girlfriend's bedside drawer. So at 3:30 in the morning, I woke her up with my cell phone shining light on her bedside drawer, trying to find the Benadryl.
Uh-huh.
And then took a Benadryl. The asthma went away, but then the upshot is I had jacked myself up with espresso before going to bed, and now at 3:30 in the morning was taking a Benadryl. So I've been waking up since 9:30, and on top of all of that, it's been the spring forward, so the day is just bleeding away super fast.
Yeah.
Which I hope is an explanation for any sort of low energy you might hear from me, and also why there's a coffee maker running in the background.
Sean needs his caffeine.
Sean needs more of that cheese. This is the most technical episode we've ever done of this podcast. You've had technical videos before, but they preceded this podcast's existence. So I sat down to watch your video a few days ago.
Uh-huh.
And partway through it, I thought, I am Homer Simpson watching the Guide to Home Repair video with Troy McClure.
Yeah.
Now, do you have extruded polyvinyl foam insulation?
No.
Good. Assemble the aluminum J channel using self-furring screws. Install.
What do I do in
After
case...
applying brushable coating to the panels,
Wait a minute.
you'll need some corrosion-resistant metal stucco lath.
Wait a minute.
If you can't find metal stucco lath,
Uh-huh.
use carbon fiber stucco lath.
Oh!
Now barge the lath.
You got a lot of factoids piled up on top of each other in this episode, don't you?
Yes, I do. I on Twitter tweeted several times about how this episode really kind of kicked my butt. There was so much details in pulling it together, and I had to not only read and learn a whole bunch of stuff myself, but I reached out to people that knew a lot more about this than I do, to make sure I wasn't making incorrect assumptions and I wasn't going down a bad path. So yeah, this was a very dense episode.
I was talking to our mutual friend, Frank, about this episode, and I said it's the equivalent of people with cars with a combustion engine understanding how their cars work.
Yes. Yeah.
It's, the idea of, like, well, do you have a faulty carburetor? And if you stop me and say, what's a carburetor do? I have no idea. And that's not a good thing. To use these technologies, to use these devices and not understand on some basic level the principles involved is not a good idea. And we'll get a little bit into the details of this a little bit later in the podcast, but also the sources of a lot of these products, where the products are made, how they're made, where they're components come from is also very important. And that's a big part of this story, I think. And you touch on it, but you didn't go really deep into it. But I think that's an important part of this. So to start off with, you've got a breakdown of the 3 different types of batteries that have, one of which has been the most used up to this point, which is the cylindrical. And my question is, with the cylindrical, it seems almost too simple to frame it in this way. Am I right that that is basically just a massive pack of what look like AA batteries?
The bottom of a Tesla looks like just a gigantic pack of thousands of AA batteries. That's essentially what it looks like.
It's essentially what it looks like, but it's not essentially that.
It is that.
So if you took one of those cells, you would effectively have a AA battery.
Well, it's larger than a AA battery. It's several centimeters taller, and it's a little bigger around. It's more like a battery.
Okay.
I don't know. It's I don't know the exact dimensions offhand, but it is a little heavier, a little larger, a little taller.
And then the other types of batteries, the prismatic, that's something that would be more in line with what we see in our cell phones.
Cell phones have a lot of prismatic batteries. They also have pouch style batteries. If you've ever had like a rechargeable cordless phone or remote control, and you pop open the back of the cordless phone, there's like a little rectangular battery pack. That's a prismatic battery.
Okay. And then the pouch batteries, am I correct that they were invented by kangaroos?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes.
I like the detail that the pouch batteries are susceptible to heat and humidity. And what I found amusing about that is clearly there's no issue with heat and humidity in driving. It seems like that could be a powder keg combination.
I didn't go into this because it was going down a weird tangent, but the cylindrical batteries, even though they aren't susceptible to that same issue, they have basically a safety valve in the top of the battery that if the battery gets overheated or the pressure goes up too much, that little escape valve basically bursts to let the pressure out so that the battery won't explode. And is in that process of that valve going, it then also deactivates the battery, so it will no longer function.
So it stops the chemical reaction that's actually taking place.
Yeah, it basically just kills the battery, and it lets the pressure out so it doesn't explode. So it's like if it does that, the battery is essentially dead. I wondered if I should bring that up, but it felt like, okay, this is not important information for this topic, but
that's really kind of cool.
It is kind of cool that they've put that in there so that there's a safety valve.
What was the most surprising detail from your research that didn't make it into the video, other than the pressure valve on the cylindrical batteries?
There's the 3 format styles, like the case that the battery goes in, and then there's all the different kinds of chemistries that you can put into those packs. So you could have the same formula that goes into a cell, a cylindrical cell or a pouch cell or a prismatic cell. But what I found interesting was, and I did not go down this path because it was like, this is like a topic to itself, and it's also really into the weeds. But there are certain formulations that work better in one format versus another. So this chemistry works best as a prismatic or pouch, and this one works better in cylindrical. And it has to do with how much that chemistry expands and contracts during charging and discharging. It's like there was like this like little rabbit hole of complexity to how they put these things together, and it kind of blew my mind of like, I knew there were lots of different chemistries, and there's like it's almost like mad science with the way they make these batteries, because you can use a standard formulation to make one tweak to the electrolyte and you have this dramatic increase in energy. Or you could make one tweak to the cathode and it does something completely different. It really is like, scientists over a cauldron just trying different things out to see what works. And I thought that was complex enough. And then when I realized, wait, the format also can play a role in how effective these things are and how long they last, because this works better in a larger format cell because it needs more kind of room to expand. And if it's a cylindrical cell, it's really confined and it's not going to do as well. It was really, really surprising to me that it's even more complex than I already thought it was.
Right.
I guess I'd say.
And behind the scenes, you mentioned that Tesla's on the verge. They'll be making an announcement at their battery event, which will be in April. So that's a month away. So their announcement could be, it was interesting in the comments on your video that there was a number of your listeners, and hats off to your listeners who clearly haven't eaten a lot of espresso cheese and had an asthma attack in the middle of the night and then had daylight savings when they woke up, because you've got some really on the ball comments, very astute, informed comments from your viewers. They knew technical aspects and pointed out, in some cases, not to haul you out, but some misstatements on your part or some lack of clarification on your part. So your viewers are clearly very, very informed. Many of the comments were along the lines of, we can expect to be really surprised by what might come out in April. That I think there's, not to build up hype too much, but there's a lot of expectations that what Tesla might announce is something as disruptive to the battery industry as Tesla has already been to the automotive industry.
I would say yes. I know people, they're not people that are directly involved in what Tesla is doing with their batteries, but they're people that are very close to that and have a lot of knowledge about the types of things that are going on. And they're telling me this is going to blow everybody away. So it's like the fact that these people who know what the hell they're talking about are saying this is going to be kind of game changing is to say it's got me excited would be an understatement. And you probably don't pay attention to this news, but just like this past week, GM had a big press conference about their electric vehicle strategy going forward. And they were showcasing like 8 different cars they're going to be launching over the next 5 years. And they touted at length their new, I think it's called the Ultium battery pack technology they've come up with LG, and saying it's cutting edge. It's going to hit this $100 per kilowatt hour, which is the magical number everybody keeps talking about. Because once battery cells are $100 per kilowatt hour or less, at that point, they start to become cheaper than gasoline cars.
Okay.
And so that's why people keep talking about that number. And they're touting all this stuff, but it was so vague about, well, when are you going to hit the $100 per kilowatt hour?
Yes.
It was like they had no specifics. It was all very vague, and it was them clearly saying, we're here. And what's shocking when you think about it is that Tesla is very close to that point today. There's estimates that they're in the 120 range. Some people even speculate they're almost at $100 right now for a cell. And they're about to drop a major bombshell in April about some major breakthrough that they're going to have with their stuff.
Right.
So it's expected that when they make that announcement, they're going to say, we're at the $100 thing, or we're about to pass it.
Right.
Or
which may not actually be, it may be about the $100 mark as opposed to we've removed cobalt.
No, it's going to be about the cobalt. I guarantee you they're going to say there's no more cobalt. We have a new formula. This battery, they're going to probably, the things that they'll hit is our battery packs will last 1 million miles. They're also going to say that they have no cobalt, and they're probably going to announce the price per kilowatt that they've achieved with this method and where it can go. And it's going to be so far ahead of where everybody else is. And GM is touting, we're getting there, but they didn't say when. And here comes Tesla basically going to say, we've done it. And it's going to, it's one of those, everybody is trying to skate where the puck is instead of where it's going. And it's fascinating how far ahead they are. And it reminds me very much, and I hate it when I say this, it's very much like Apple. It's like Apple for a long time was so far ahead of the competition when it came to their iPods and their iPhones that it took a decade for the rest of the industry to catch up. And it's like, that's where we are right now with Tesla and electric vehicles, is they are so far ahead. It's going to take 10 years before GM and Volkswagen and all these other companies actually catch up to where Tesla is today.
Right.
It's it's kind of mind-boggling to me.
Elon Musk is doing things with some of that intellectual property, which he's making some of it available, just publicly available, putting it in the marketplace to say, basically, not only should those guys catch up, they should just do it now because the world is on fire. We can't keep burning petrol
And the argument against going electric is usually it's too expensive, and gas car, you can't charge fast enough, and you can't do all this other stuff. And it's like people are working actively right now to achieve those goals, and Tesla is one of the companies that's going to probably be the first to achieve all those goals, which is why everybody's excited about April, because they're probably going to come out and make an announcement that essentially makes their electric cars price equivalent to a gasoline car, and if not better, which means at some point not too long from now, we'll have electric cars that cost less than gas cars. And once we hit that point, it's going to be a hard sell for somebody to want to go buy a gas car.
Right.
It's like, why would I spend $30,000 on this car when I could spend $22,000 on this one, and it's as good and better?
So at this point, there's two paths that I see ahead for our conversation, and they overlap a little bit, but they do go in two different directions. And one is about the human rights issues around cobalt, and one is about the technology itself. So I'm going to follow the path of the technology right now, because I think the human rights element, it's going to be a briefer conversation between the two of us, but I think it's a more important conversation. It's the one I want the podcast to end on. The development of the new technologies that Tesla is going through and the other researchers are going through. Is there an element of scale that could be used on the new technologies? In other words, could you have a breakthrough in the Tesla car battery that could change the way our cell phone batteries are designed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It comes down to the chemistry. It's like it's one of those, there's not a one size fits all. So it's not like you come up with this chemistry and this is the chemistry that's going to be used in every battery on the planet for every single use case. Because if you're talking grid scale energy storage, there's other formats that may be the better chemistry to go with. But if they've achieved something that's not going to have cobalt, it's going to have this long lifespan, it's going to have really good charge cycles, it's going to have all the stuff that it meets for an EV, there's a lot of other use cases that are similar that could benefit directly from that breakthrough. And for me, the big one is energy storage just in general for houses and for grid. So it's like whatever they announce for their updates for their car, it's not going to surprise me if they also say, and we're putting this into our power walls, into our mega packs that are going into, the grid and all that kind of stuff. So it's something that can definitely have a much bigger impact than just on cars.
And how that meshes with other sources of renewable energy. So homes with solar panels and wind towers and all of, the evolution of new renewable energy sources to have those packs that might be able to be charged super fast and retain more and provide it cheaply.
Yeah. Or cheapy.
Espresso cheese, Matthew.
Yeah, I know.
Espresso cheese.
It's the Achilles heel of renewable energy. Is that
espresso cheese is the Achilles heel?
Espresso cheese is the Achilles heel. It's how it produces so much energy so cheaply, but it's at times you don't need it.
Right.
And so it's like the storage question is it's the $1 million question for renewable energy. Once you crack that nut and find a way to store that energy cost effectively, it's once again, just like the EV hitting $100 per kilowatt hour. That is the game changer, where it's like nobody will ever build another gas plant. Nobody will ever build another coal plant, because why would you? It's like it's going to be cheaper and more effective to put up wind turbines and solar panels and a huge battery system. And it's clean energy, it's cheaper, and it's very effective. Once we get to that point, fossil fuel industry is screwed. Right. Once we get to that point.
Is there a reason why they wouldn't mix and match batteries in a device? Would there be an advantage in some way for there to be two battery packs in a car? Or is that something that's like, why would you do that?
I have a feeling Elon would say, why the hell would you do that? But there is a lot of reason to mix and match like you're talking about. Like one of the things is mix and matching a battery pack with some supercapacitors inside of a car, because supercapacitors, they can't store a lot of energy, but they can take energy and give energy in huge bursts much faster than a battery pack. So if you put the two together, you'd have a car that could very quickly capture all of the energy from regenerative braking, and then also just pour a lot of energy into the motors when you're gunning it, when you're trying to take off.
Right.
But then when you're running at speed, it's just pulling directly off the battery pack. Or there's different chemistries of batteries that could do something similar, where some batteries are better at, it's called specific power, how much energy can come through the faucet, essentially, at once. And then there's other chemistries that are better for long-term, a little slower specific power coming through. So it's like there is a rationale for why you might want to mix and match. And GM actually talked about that this past week, which was that their battery pack with their modules, they'll be able to do exactly what you're talking about. Like, here's a bunch of prismatic batteries with this chemistry, and then the other half of the pack, or a quarter of the pack, is this other module with a slightly different chemistry.
Right.
And they can mix and match to achieve that goal.
And then the vehicle is smart so that it knows when you gun it, it needs to pull from the
one section versus
the section
other,
that's able to provide the battery power much faster.
Correct. But I based on things Elon has said over the past year or two, he's definitely he's got this mindset of that's adding complexity where it's not needed, because if you can achieve a certain level with battery technology, it makes that a moot point. And that he looks at as more of it's like a Band-Aid fix, because the current technologies are kind of limited in certain ways. So you kind of make up for that limitation by doing this with supercapacitors. But this new technology we're working on is just so goddamn good, you don't need to do supercapacitors anymore because it's just a moot point.
Right.
So
I think
that's where he'd be.
That does sort of overlap with something we talked about last week, which is the combination of technologies where one of them might break down and then you're tied to a broken device. If you had a battery pack that was effectively two different types of batteries and one of them failed in some spectacular way, the other battery pack would now be potentially damaged or useless.
Well, it's specifically to Elon again, it's like Tesla battery packs are made up of modules, and the modules are filled with cells. And that's the way it is today. It's the way it's been ever since Tesla has been making cars.
And the cells are filled with espresso cheese.
Exactly. And GM was touting their whole module strategy where they can mix and match modules within a battery pack to use different cells that do different things. So they can adjust on the fly. If they have to switch suppliers, it's no big deal, that kind of stuff. And in a recent interview on a podcast, Elon went on length about how the modules in Tesla battery packs are like an appendix. It's a vestigial thing they no longer need. He said it's there because that's the way it's always was done, and we had to do that in the beginning, but we don't have to now, and it's going to be more cost effective to not do that. So it's leading everybody to believe that Tesla is going to be getting rid of modules, and it will just be cells in a pack. It will no longer be cells to module, module to pack. And so here's GM coming out going, well, we got this great module strategy. And it's like, what? Elon has just been beating the drum of, why would you do modules? It makes no sense anymore.
Right.
So it's one of those skating to where the puck is versus to where instead of where it's going.
Yeah.
It's like Elon seems to be looking to where it's going, and GM is looking to where things currently are today.
Right. So the other big element that I wanted to get to at the end here was cobalt free, not only for LFP, as you mentioned, it's going to make one heck of a title for your first hip hop album.
Yeah, I know.
The story behind cobalt is one of extreme human rights abuse and the mining of it in Africa in particular, where the nations of Africa that have a lot of cobalt, and I recently watched a old news story on CBS from 2018, went into the child labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the efforts by all of the cobalt consumers, the companies like Apple, Tesla, Microsoft, to try to cut out the middlemen and go directly to buying from the mining companies in an attempt to be able to directly confront human rights abuses. Because the middlemen allow for the companies to deny any sort of child labor. And then to flip the issue on its head it is awful that these children are working in these mines, but if they don't have those jobs, what are they going to do? So it's a very complex and heartbreaking story. Here in the U.S., other parts of the world, our consumption of products where we're blind to what goes into the manufacturing of them. I've got my iPhone in my pocket and I walk around happily with it, and child labor may have been involved in getting components for the battery. And then a number of years ago, there were the breaking stories of the production companies in China and the human rights abuses in the factories where the phones are actually manufactured. So this is all part of an extremely large and complex and distressing storyline. And I think that in some ways, Tesla's and the other companies' attempts to push the technology forward is in some ways an attempt to confront that issue. And the news story in 2018 actually mentioned that at that point, and I definitely don't know the answer to this, maybe you do. In 2018, Tesla's response to CBS around this news story was that they were currently looking at ways of creating a battery production facility in North America that would only use North American sourced components. So they were going to be looking at cobalt that would only be produced and mined in North America. And it was a product that the news story went into details about how at one point 15, 20 years ago, there were cobalt mines in Idaho that got shut down because nobody wanted cobalt. And then we had the explosion of high-end tech into the consumer market with phones. And suddenly cobalt became a hot commodity. And so I'm not sure if you know, but did Tesla ever manage to be able to pull itself out of being a consumer of the cobalt produced in the harsher facilities such as those in the DRC?
They have dialed back how much they're buying from those kind of areas. And they're not alone. Other companies have too. So buying from some of those questionable mines in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, has gone way down. But the middleman issue is still allowing those artisanally sourced.
Yeah,
it's called
the
artisanal.
The use of that term is really, and what they mean
disturbing.
by that is the news story shows footage. And if anybody's seen, there's also more recent articles, news stories about this. What they mean by artisanal is literally children
By hand.
walking into places by hand, digging by hand. And they recognize the mineral, and then they have to wash it and then transport it, and it's all done by hand. And it's literally like wheelbarrows and bicycles to facilities where they can sell it to the middlemen. The middlemen buy this for next to nothing. So these people, including children, are being paid pennies per pound, and then that in turn is sold for thousands of dollars per ton to the consumers who produce battery packs and other things from the cobalt. So,
Yeah.
But the middleman economy allows for deniability, and that's part of the issue. Is that it allows companies to say, like, well, we're not working with companies that use child labor. When the cameras were running and they were going into the mining facilities, security guards would chase the children away because they know how this is being perceived. But when they used a hidden camera and went into a middleman purchasing area, none of the purchasers asked who mined this. They didn't.
Exactly.
They didn't ask the
Yes.
question. So then the middlemen then selling to consumers like Tesla and Apple, even if Apple and Tesla ask, like, what is the source of this? There's a big gap in the supply chain where they're never going to know.
That's the problem, is that the companies are trying to do the right thing. But at the same time, the only way truly to get out of this is to cut back how much cobalt you use.
Right.
And so even though these companies are trying to make the right moves to source it from better places, they're also trying to do the ultimate decision, which is cutting it out, which sidesteps the issue of human rights. And it also helps reduce the cost, because cobalt is it's difficult to get because there's so little of it,
Yeah.
which is why it's expensive. So cutting it out gets rid of the human rights issues, and it also makes for cheaper products. So it's a win-win from every angle to get rid of it. And the other thing to point out is that cobalt is used in a lot of stuff.
It's used a lot of places, yeah.
It's used in cosmetics. It's used in semiconductors. It's used in batteries. It's used in a ton of technologies and other things. So it's not just Tesla and EV makers, even though that's the largest portion. So if they can solve that, it's going to cut the demand in half if EV makers don't have to use it anymore.
Yeah.
But there's still other places we need to do our part to try to cut that out of our daily use.
And it's an issue where you need to attack it from both sides, both from the consumer side. And by consumer, I mean the major companies that are purchasing it as a mineral. But you need to attack it on the consumer side, and you need to attack it from the human rights side, which is working with those regions where you have child labor being used in that way, and help those countries develop diversified economic support so that people can actually have jobs where they can support their families, and that there's an opportunity for education and for children not to be used in this way.
Right.
As opposed to, they really don't have a choice. There's no other means of supporting themselves. And, the question of what should they do is not as simple as, well, at least they have a job. Because this is backbreaking, toxic work.
There's actually an interesting angle to this that I hadn't really been aware of until more recently, which was there are countries in Africa that are really up and coming for technology. Like they have cutting edge internet connections that are way better than what we have here in the United States.
Yeah, because they jumped past the wired communication. They jumped directly from not having it to having wireless.
What I find fascinating is a lot of technology companies are looking at moving headquarters or building additional places to recruit people, to recruit talent in Africa, in different countries. And so like Jack Dorsey, who's the CEO of Twitter, he's been talking about wanting to move to Africa and potentially opening a Twitter headquarters over there and other businesses over there. You say, what are we going to do if, they can't mine for cobalt? It's one of those, we have to get other countries past the point of needing to do that kind of work.
It's like I said, the diversity of economy.
Exactly. So I find it fascinating that technology companies are part of the reason that this is a problem today. And at the same time, some technology companies are looking to help solve that by moving there and finding resources there that are actual human resources that can actually do software coding, that can actually do the work that's not in a mine. It's at a desk behind a computer. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. We've covered quite a bit.
Yes, we
and
have.
We've eaten a lot of cheese.
Well, you have.
I have. I think you can hear it in my voice. So let us know what you think. You can leave comments on Matt's video, or you can shout out at us on Twitter at stilltbdfm, or at by Sean Farrell, at Matt Farrell, and at undecidedmf. Be sure to watch for the latest videos on YouTube from Undecided with Matt Farrell. You can find the podcast at stilltbd.fm. You can subscribe, and that's available through all of the major podcast providers, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, so on and so forth. Please be sure to give us a rating. You can review us, and you can share it with your friends, because that really helps the podcast. The podcast helps the channel helps Matthew, and Matthew helps me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Oh, can you hear the coffee maker in the background?
Yes, I can. Okay. I can hear a little click, 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 click. I like that your podcast strategy is just have life going on around you.
Well, I don't have a choice. I don't have a dedicated room.
I know.
I say that we go forward, and I'll work that in, if that's okay with you. Or do you want to just wait?
How far in is it? Like, how much longer is there for the?
We probably have another 5 or 10 minutes. Let me just work it in.
Yeah, we can work it in. Okay.
Hello.
Like, I just heard a click, 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 click.